On this episode of the Unselects, we're answering two questions. The first, roundabouts. We go round and around and around. Is it going to solve our problems or just make us dizzy?
And bike lanes and sidewalks, are they worth having if they don't go anywhere? I'm Greg Richards.
And I'm Brian Costello, and we are the Unselects.
Hey, Brian, we're mixing it up tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about Route 20, right? Kind of the main artery, one of the two, right? Between Route 9 and Route 20. If you're going to get around Shrewsbury, you got to use those roads. There's a lot happening on Route 20, and we're going to really spend some time looking at what are the plans, not only locally, but with the state to improve Route 20 and hopefully allow us to get around town better. Fair? So what we're going to start with here is talk a little bit about the development projects, right? I think a lot of people might be aware of these. There's a large UPS project being talked about currently, both at the Grafton and Shrewsbury planning boards and mutual planning board meetings. And that's about 800,000 square feet. We'll take a little look at this, as well as, a bunch of 40B developments and other, let's say, development along 20. One of these, I believe, was just approved by the Zoning Board of Appeals. Emerald Run, I believe, on Green Street, the 300 units. So let's take a look at this UPS project, because I think there's a huge impact here for those who used Route 20. It's a 850,000 square feet and 260 or 72 loading docks. So there's going to be a lot of trucks. And I believe even the number that they've used is 1,500 additional tractor-trailer trips per day. What is your thought about that, just in general, about the scale of that type of project?
Yeah, this is an enormous facility, and it's not replacing the UPS facility that's currently in Shrewsbury. It's in addition to. The thing with this is, it was most on Grafton land, and then they did move the building a little bit so Shrewsbury could get more tax revenue. But the reality is we're taking the brunt of the traffic, because all of that traffic is going to go up Centec Boulevard onto our favorite route, Route 20.
Absolutely.
So it's a challenge. It's a big undertaking.
Yeah, and this was even talked about at town meeting. I think it's important that we kind of reference back to show not only town meeting members, but members of the community, what is the impact of decisions at town meeting. And it was a very minor one here. It was just to allow the trucks to go in and out of this facility a little bit easier. But to your point, there was discussions back and forth because we wanted to, at least Shrewsbury wanted to benefit from some tax revenue by having the building. I believe Selco is providing all the power, so Selco is going to be getting revenue from servicing this facility. One of the things I came to know about this Route 20 program was actually at town meeting. I think they were handing out a flyer about this corridor. There was going to be a Zoom that was held back in May. And one of the things that caught my eye, and I think you mentioned it in the questions, is they're talking about two roundabouts on Route 20. And I actually attended this Zoom with the Mass DOT, and I was a little bit alarmed with the plan. So I think it's important that we dig into this a little bit and allow those who aren't aware of what they're planning to really be aware of it, because it's really critical we have some feedback from the community, because I'm not sure I understand what we're doing here. So let's take a look a little bit deeper. I didn't know, there's a study that the Mass DOT did about the Route 20 corridor. So for us, that's going essentially from the Worcester line on Route 20, through where the Market Basket program or project was, all the way down to Route 9, right? So that whole stretch is what we're talking about. So we've kind of already addressed as part of it Edgemere, but the remainder, right, as you know, if you've driven on it, it goes from 2 lanes in both directions to 2 lane and 1 lane in the other, and back and forth and back and forth. And ideally, when you look at it, it could be like, wouldn't it be great? And I think even in the last planning board meeting, Chairman DiPaolo mentioned, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could, as part of your development for UPS, widen the Route 20 the whole way? We'd like to see it. And I kind of agree, right? And that made sense. But it doesn't seem that's where they're going. In this project, just to give you a scale, it's a $31.4 million project that is federally funded. There was federal dollars and state dollars as part of it. And I think that sounds to me like a lot of money because keep in mind, this is 1 mile. We're talking $31.4 million per mile. All right. I don't, I think it's important. And where I want to go to is a reminder. As a town, we do get funding from the state. It's under Chapter 90. And there is funds we have under that to use for roads. But I didn't really know what the scope of that was. So I believe I have a video here of Kevin Mizikar talking to DPW about Chapter 90. So let's take a quick look at that.
Chapter 90 lays out a formula based upon both lane miles and population density, I believe, is the base formula. So what does that look like? What type of, how many lane miles does that get us, or linear feet, or what? How can someone get a grasp?
Yeah, so we get probably just shy of about $1 million
Yep.
from Chapter 90, and it really depends on, we probably do about a mile, maybe just over a mile of roads. It really depends on, sometimes you're doing like little small cul-de-sacs.
Yeah.
So there's some inefficiencies with, you know, because obviously the longer, straighter roads you get more bang for your buck. So,
So we're on the 153-year replacement cycle then?
about very close, yeah.
So two comments I want to get your take on is the 153-year replacement cycle. So just to be clear on that, there's 153 miles of roads that Shrewsbury has to maintain within our town. And we're only able to do essentially 1 mile of repairs or replacement in a year. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Richard?
when you think about it that way, it's sort of crazy, right? Because it seems like they're always working on something, and I guess it's just little patches. But when I look at the monies available and how we're spending our money, it seems odd that we don't actually spend that much on roads and to keep them updated. And then when you look at the dollars in this to do Route 20 for the 1 mile, $31 million. It's kind of crazy, right? What's so special about that? Why is it that expensive? Why are we not spending dollars to keep our roads, which are essential, obviously, updated and safe?
Right. I thought the same thing because I'm thinking, so it's that 1 mile stretch, and I'm not minimizing the work that needs to be done on Route 20. I don't think either of us would say that. I 100% agree that should be critical, but we should look at budget. It shouldn't just be, hey, we're getting $31 million from the federal government. We need to spend this all. So who cares how much it really costs for the project? That's not really our money. We got to spend it. I think we should look at it differently and say, okay, that's 31 years of road maintenance for the town of Shrewsbury. That's significant, right? And there's a lot of roads in town that need work, right? And I've heard a lot of complaints. I'm actually going to go to a clip here. Let's take a look at one such road. And the reason I brought this road up is because I remember when I was standing at the SAC, right, on voting day, people had driven up. And when we had a conversation with them, the only question they asked me was, who can fix this road out here? And that being Lake Street. So I want to show what Lake Street looks like today, right? From Howe Avenue to the Scandinavian Athletic Club. So let's just take a look at that. So that's a half mile stretch, okay? And I lost count of the potholes.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not, trying to browbeat or say that, how dare we have roads like that. I know that happens over the course of time, especially with New England weather, right? Salt and whatnot. But if that road, right, is an example of others throughout town, it would be really ideal if we could get more than that $1 million right per year so that we could address some of these, because at some point in time there's legitimately vehicle damage going to be potentially caused. So those are the things that would be great if we said, do we really need 31.5 million? So I think we should look at this plan and what we're really spending and maybe try to figure out where they're coming up with a $31 million budget for this.
Yeah, and just a note on that video, that looks like every town road. I don't know, it looks like Walnut Street as well, Lake Ave, Lake Street, a lot of them are that way.
Right.
And I agree, New England, all in all. But again, how do we spend our money? and how do we actually smartly take care of the residents?
Exactly. So I pull up this slide here, and the reason I'm showing this, it's a lot here, but I want to compare two things. On the top, for those who haven't seen it, is the overview from South Street to Route 9, showing the two proposed roundabouts there and half a mile apart. All right. And I'm showing the source of where these are. I didn't draw these. I didn't make them up. That is on the Mass DOT website. On the bottom is that original Shrewsbury master plan, or the mass plan for Route 20, which just shows a widened road with some additional turn lanes, which to me is a much more traditional look, right? Which I completely understand. I am struggling on these roundabouts. And in more detail, let's take a look at this. This is the roundabout proposed by the former Christmas tree shops, right? Shrewsbury Village, you want to call it. And we're coming off of Route 9 into a roundabout, right? Versus actually coming in, adding some additional turn lanes. It seemed like improving the traffic that way. There is a little interesting point here, because as somebody over in the Walnut Street area, they're actually adding, I think, a connector road here to allow you to get out, because I think you're preventing people from either turning left out of this, or they're taking that into consideration, I believe, here as well.
Yeah, it's funny. When I saw this plan, the original plan, the one you're showing,
Yeah.
I live on Walnut Street, not too far from this, and I actually liked this plan. It makes sense. I assumed that they would potentially cul-de-sac where Walnut meets Route 20
Yep.
at the end. I don't know if that was in the plan, but this connector makes sense. It's lights. It slows down the traffic. It makes everybody turn. I see accidents in this intersection every single week, multiple accidents. There's pieces of cars at that intersection all the time, right? And so this plan made sense to me because it feeds the Walnut Street traffic to Valenti. It stops the traffic on Route 20, but it's a smart move to me.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned too about accidents, because part of this plan, which I looked into, was, and on the call, there is a lot of discussion around, hey, roundabouts are safer. They actually help improve traffic safety. But if you look at, let's say, accident locations on Route 20, it was in this plan, you can look it up. The highest incident of accidents along the corridor of Route 20 is Grafton Street. 90 accidents in a 2-year period versus only 14 in that Walnut Street area. Now, they are addressing that in another plan. I will say that there is plans for that intersection, but there isn't the level of accidents where you would say, hey, we need to completely scrap traditional traffic, right?
Yeah.
Or the way that roads work, so that we can put in a roundabout. That's the
Also,
part that interests
I think the thing is, when you look at a roundabout, the person in the roundabout has the right of way, right?
Sure.
Well, there's a lot of traffic coming either east or west on Route 20. So there's a feeder consistently. Getting out of Valenti or getting out of whatever will be the Christmas tree shops is going to be almost a nightmare of Westboro proportions. And if anybody's gone to the Westboro roundabout during rush hour or in the afternoon, it's very difficult to sneak yourself into that thing.
Right. And there's not only one roundabout, there's actually two.
Yeah.
So half a mile down, right, we now come into a roundabout that's by the Dunkin' Donuts, Lumber Liquidators. So I think the only purpose of this is to allow people to get in and out of, I don't know if it's Dunkin' Donuts or I'm not really sure, because Rainbow Motel doesn't exist. Obviously, they'll probably develop that area, but I'm not really sure why there's two, right? So I know there's a lot of discussion, on roundabouts, and I'm not sure why they're putting them in here. I know there is talk of safety, but I think what's important is, they've done this other places, and all across the country. And one of the things I want to show is kind of some feedback, when you look at when these have been done, is there, unintended consequences when roundabouts are installed, right, in other portions of the country. So let's take a look there.
We began investigating accidents at this roundabout in Hamburg when there was a fatal crash there last year. Tonight, our investigation is expanding. Are roundabouts creating more harm than good?
Is a Volusia County roundabout actually causing more problems?
The roundabout was installed this summer with the goal of cutting down on backups in that area. But people who live nearby tell us it's doing just the opposite.
A traffic study was done and found that there have been a high number of crashes at this roundabout.
Increasing number of roundabouts in Michigan, been great for body shops, at least. That's according to new numbers from Michigan Auto Law.
In the last decade, though, more and more roundabouts or traffic circles have replaced stoplights on our streets. But ABC 15's John Genovese found that some are leading to more crashes.
You know, it's funny. I travel quite a bit to Michigan for my work, and the one thing you'll see there, it's a grid system, and they have these long boulevards. And I always thought, wow, how can they? Whenever I went to roundabout there, it's weird because they have boulevards which actually work. If you think about Route 20, it's wider, so it's 4 lanes. And then instead of crossing traffic on a light, you actually have a turn that then makes you go the other way, right? So there's a right turn off of the boulevard, brings you to the feeder street, you wait for the light, you go around. I have never seen that in Massachusetts, but that seems to be the perfect solution for Route 20. Rather than dangerous roundabouts.
Right. And you know, this is one of those things. On the surface, when you design it, it makes perfect sense. The problem is you have the human factor, right? And drivers, are on the whole, are not great, right? If you drive around in the streets, people really don't know what they're doing with straight intersections. Now, when you add these, you know, even if you're driving it every day, you might get the hang of it. But keep in mind, with the UPS and other things, you're going to have 1,500 semi-tractor trailers driving around 2 circles in a 1-mile stretch, along with all the other drivers getting through there. So I'm struggling to see how this won't cause more accidents, or at least cause more congestion and a whole bunch of unforeseen issues here, right?
Yeah.
Right. So if the roundabouts weren't enough, the other piece of this puzzle, which I do want to talk about, is bike lanes and sidewalks. How many pedestrians and cyclists have you seen on Route 20?
There's a few more recently, but generally speaking, you don't see very many because it is frightening. But you don't see very many people walking down Route 20. If you do, it's sort of like a weird moment in your day.
Right. Right. And keep in mind, the way this is proposed is you're talking a 5-foot path on one side, a 10-foot on the other, right? Connecting to nothing, because there's nothing on the other side, right? So as they went through and looked at this plan, right, why do these get created? Well, there is Mass DOT, all right, created in 2020 that said, hey, any road moving forward has to have 2 things, right? It has to have pedestrian facilities, meaning sidewalks to be able to access the roadway, and it has to have bicycle facilities. So this is a mandate. And we talk about bureaucracy, where it's black and white. You have to put in sidewalks, bicycle path, no matter what. So even if it doesn't make sense, or if you look at holistically, is this the right plan? They still do it anyway, right? And more importantly, here in Shrewsbury, if you look at it, there's only 5 miles. This was in the actual master plan documents, okay? There's 5 miles of bicycle infrastructure in Shrewsbury, meaning bike lanes. You can ride your bike, you know, on a street. Good luck riding it on Lake Street with all the potholes. But you can ride it on a street, but there's only existing bike lanes on 5 miles. Pedestrians, an even more interesting note. So we're going to have a 1-mile stretch that's going to have sidewalks for pedestrians. However, there's a note there. Most roads that are within a 1-mile distance do not have a existing sidewalk network. So let's just take a step back on that. That means if you want to utilize the sidewalk on Route 20, you have to traverse at least a mile of street without sidewalks to get there as a pedestrian to use the 1-mile stretch. Am I missing something?
Yeah, think about it. The feeder roads just on that 1 mile, you've got Walnut Street, I think you've got South, and you've got Green Street, major roads. They're very narrow. Mm-hmm. There's no sidewalks. I live probably a half mile from that Route 20 intersection on Walnut, and you take your life in your hands if you're walking in the street. So I still have to take my life in my hands to walk up a sidewalk that goes, I don't know, Dunkin' Donuts? There's nothing there, right? There's no there because if I took a right, there's no sidewalk going up Southwest Cutoff. There's no sidewalk going further up Route 20.
Right.
It's just literally a road or a sidewalk to nowhere because a bureaucratic administrative law said it should be there.
Right.
By the way, that goes to that $31 million,
Yes.
which you could really cut back. Now,
Right.
I'm all for sidewalks and I
Yes.
want bike lanes and all of that. But again, short-term thinking. It's not solving any problem, and it might quite possibly be causing more problems.
Right. And they've tried this at other places in Mass DOT, and there's a great example, which we're going to go to here, and showing what is that consequence or how silly it might be when you just kind of say, hey, I'm going to slap a bike lane in because this is a new road. So let's take a look at that.
A beautiful evening for a bike ride. But on busy Route 1, a new bike lane pops up out of nowhere on the 4-lane road in Plainville. No other bike lane leading to it. I had to cut across traffic to give it a try.
One of the first things you notice is there's no one else on a bike who's out here riding along the highway. And then it goes for maybe like 500 feet and then just stops all of a sudden at this busy intersection with Route 152.
The Massachusetts Department of Transportation tells us the bike lanes were put in pursuant to their guidelines for making bicycle accommodation.
All right, so this is the ramp to get on 495. I'm clearly not getting on there, though I never thought I'd be riding along Route 1 here either. So where does this go? Right here. Dead stop. This is the end of the line in the middle of a cloverleaf.
So there you have the perfect example.
The guy put his life in it.
I know. He's the only guy probably ever to use that bike lane. I'm pretty sure to this day. So you look at it because of what they said there. The Mass DOT comment was, oh, it's in our guidelines, so we had to put it there, right? And then here you have somebody who's riding along and potentially could go onto 495 on a bike and then stops essentially on Route 1 in the middle of nowhere. I mean, that is what I think a very clear point of this is say, you look at this big master plan, and we'll get into it a little bit here, and it's so big and so grand in scope that it's not feasible to execute upon. But instead of admitting that and say, maybe that's not where we should go down, it's like, we're just going to piecemeal this thing, even if we never get to the end goal.
Yeah.
Right.
It's governance by absurdity, bordering on, idiocracy. It's not the town. This is a state federal guideline, right? But it's just kind of a dumb guideline. That clip is hysterical, but it's frightening in the sense that they paid for that.
I know.
Right. And it looked actually frightening.
Yeah. So where does this kind of stuff come from, macro wise, right? So you kind of go look, there's an entity called Smart Growth America. And the reason I wanted to also put this up, it does tie into MBTA, right? When you talk about MBTA communities, people say, where is this stuff coming from? Why do we need to do this? Well, you look at what they're talking about. They're talking about mixed land usage, right? Walkable neighborhoods, a range of housing opportunities and choices. So it's a philosophy, right? And then that philosophy morphed itself into what they call complete streets. And complete streets was saying, hey, we have these roads, and roads, they shouldn't just be for cars. Anybody who wants to use a road should be able to use it. So that's where you look at complete streets include wide sidewalks, turn lanes, bicycle paths, sidewalks, all those things, right? To at least make things more accessible, right? But, why on earth, or what was the mantra of complete streets? And some of this it goes back, you talk about 2019, and this goes back to another thing on MBTA, it's grant funding, okay? Let's quickly go through this. There's a lot here. We don't have the time to go through it in the detail, but the reason a lot of this was completed was, hey, if you as Shrewsbury, any town, doesn't want to participate, you're not going to be eligible for funding. So that Chapter 90, we talked about $1 million. If we want more money than that, well, you have it. But, there's a caveat. You have to do it the way we want you to do it. You have to implement these complete streets, ways of the complete streets, right? And we did sign up for this as a town, which we'll get to. But the reason and the rationale behind it is, which I wasn't aware of, right? Apparently, there's a historic and alarming increase of people getting killed while walking. Did you know that, Brian?
I did not know this.
Right. And it's been increasing, all right? And this is the data that they're using to push this. But the other interesting point, because I always say facts and data, you can show charts and say, oh, I should be alarmed. The other note of this, which won't be surprising to you, because I took a look below, the level below, is those deaths they don't share are typically in cities, makes sense. Typically when pedestrians are not at an intersection and when it's dark, right? So they're saying, right, that the only way to solve this is, hey, we need to totally spend millions and millions of dollars, redo all of our roads, or potentially we could suggest to people, you really want to cross the street at an intersection, and if you don't have to, don't walk along roads at nighttime.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how silly some of this stuff gets, right? So Shrewsbury signed up for this back in 2016. Of course we did, because we can get grant money. There's familiar names that are on these signatures here. The other thing that led to is there was a regional piece of this where they actually have a central mass plan, which was signed again by a representative from Shrewsbury 2015, talking about something called Mobility 2040. And that leads us to today to what they call Beyond Mobility 2050. Now, the key part I want to mention is we never get to the goal. Right when you think, hey, we had a 2030 plan, then it goes to a 2040 plan, then it goes to a 2050 plan. It's almost as if they're always moving the goalpost in the goal line.
Yeah, it's the you know the old communist Russia Politburo 5-year plan that was never completed. This is shell game 101 for government funding and for consultants that get a lot of money from the government. Yeah. These are nonprofits, quote unquote, that put these together, these consulting firms, basically for politicians to move money around.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And I definitely encourage all of our viewers to look some of this up. There's so much detail in there, but I think there's some interesting things that I don't necessarily think are really tied in my mind to what I would consider to be mobility. All right.
You know, one of the things that comes up, tying it back to MBTA, you know, in the meetings that we attended a number of months ago and we continue to attend, a lot of this comes from these big thinking urban development planning people, right? Transit-oriented districts and all. They believe America should be an urban environment everywhere. So it's not unusual for somebody who lives in New York City or Washington, D.C. or Brooklyn to think this should be everywhere, right? Yeah. But it's just not facts, right? That bike lane to nowhere is a perfect example of that, right? The fact that they use data that says if you live in a city and it's dark and you don't cross an intersection, you might get hit, doesn't take into account the fact that, by the way, you might not get hit if you lived in a rural area where there's no buildings and you can see for miles, right? You still probably should cross at an intersection, but they're not thinking it through because really, again, it's the federal grant shell game that, again, if we're not participating, those signatures just keep getting signed.
Yep. And then let's dig into locally what that looks like in Shrewsbury. There are complete streets projects that they're here. I'm not going to go through in all these in infinite detail. So we do have a few that we're looking at. One of the ones specifically I wanted to talk about quickly here is in North Quinsigamond. And the reason I wanted to talk about it is because if you're familiar with the area, it'll be easy for people to understand this. So if you look at the proposal, and it looks similar to the Route 20 piece, they're saying, hey, we're going to take an existing 2-lane road, all right? Then what we're going to do is we're going to widen it, which means we're going to have to take over people's land, right? And widen this out in order to put in an electric scooter line, then a sidewalk on both sides, as well as 2 lanes of traffic. Well, the other thing they don't really show is look at this actual image where you actually have to shrink the traffic lanes down in order to make room for this and still expand the road, which if you've been on that road, there's a lot of traffic back and forth. So now if you have less room as a lane, could that possibly cause a safety issue? And once again, who is this for? Who's using this and where are they going with it? Because it's not connecting to other sidewalks or other bike lanes.
And you have a situation where in Shrewsbury, it's primarily a town where people commute from, right? Most people that live in Shrewsbury do not work in Shrewsbury. So you could say it's a little recreational. All right, that's fine. But to your point, it's going nowhere. A recreational bike enthusiast is not just going to ride up and down North Quinsigamond Ave, right? They want, the long bike trails, the rail trails, which I'm all in favor for, right? They want, something that is challenging, not almost getting killed on North Quinsigamond Ave by a scooter or a car or hitting a pedestrian in the pedestrian lane. Yeah. It just doesn't make any sense.
So as we close out the show tonight, I really want to encourage people for this Route 20 project, get involved. Attend any meetings that are coming up as we go through this process in the next few years, and really take a look and give your feedback if you don't think this is a good plan. The other thing I'd ask you to is follow us on Facebook. We do have a Facebook page out there. Watch us on YouTube and visit our website at theunselects.com. And if you have show ideas or you want to communicate with us, please just use the email address contact@theunselects.com. But until our next episode, have a good day.